Welcome to Disruptors for Good. In today's episode, I'm joined by David Gaines, entrepreneur, author, and owner of Terza Coffee. David has spent much of his career at the intersection of business, social impact, and community. Through Terza, he has helped build a specialty coffee company rooted in direct trade relationships, responsible sourcing, quality, and long-term partnerships with coffee producers. In our conversation, David shares what he has learned about the realities of the global coffee supply chain, why direct relationships with producers can create better economic outcomes, and how Terza's partnership with a woman-owned farm in Honduras has helped support education and community investment. We also discuss the ideas behind his two books, Radical Business and Why We Buy, Why It Matters. David explains why businesses should think beyond donations and instead evaluate how they treat employees, suppliers, customers, competitors, communities, and the environment. We also explore the power of consumer choices, the difference between conscious consumption and overconsumption, and why the products and companies we support can help shape a more responsible economy. This is a thoughtful conversation about ethical business, meaningful consumerism, and the small decisions that can lead to lasting impact. Here's my conversation with David Gaines.
Well, thanks so much, David, for joining me today. Thanks for taking the time. You've done a lot of things in impact and business, and it's always good to talk to people who have sort of lived through it and done it and, accomplished a few things in this area. And, super excited to talk about Terza, the coffee company, and a couple of books you have written. You've kind of been through the gambit of social enterprise and social impact and how consumerism has a real power. But before we get into everything, talk a little bit about, your journey up to this point. What's that been like?
Yeah. Well, really, the journey started about 15 years ago. I, at that time, owned a small business. And really, long story short, is I created my own job so that I could work at a nonprofit without depending on that nonprofit for my income. So I lived like a foot in both worlds, right? So I did that out of college. I did that for 15 years. Hit a pretty low ceiling. I did reach success. I did accomplish my goals, but I couldn't grow either the impact that I was doing or the business that I was had started because they both were designed for me to work at 20 to 25 hours a week each, right? So I actually was realizing I minimized my impact and my income opportunities. So a friend of mine started Terza Coffee in the early 2000s, someone I went to college with, and he really grew up to a point where he needed additional help. And I was exploring becoming like a business coach and, I just love business and, long-term vision and all that kind of stuff. So long story short there is he loved coffee and was amazing at coffee. And really the idea of someone thinking about the long-term vision of where we were taking the company was something that he didn't really want to care about or wasn't really passionate about. He just loved coffee so much. So I ended up buying it from him, and then he and I remained as partners for about 8 years before he did eventually say he wanted to start his own coffee shop. But the draw for me was a coffee lover and more of one now. The draw for me for Terza was ultimately there was this social impact built into our business model. For Cincinnati, we were kind of first to market in direct trade sourcing and that story, which I think and am grateful is relatively common now with new coffee roasters. But we were really kind of first to market in our city. And that was the appeal for me. It's like, well, if I'm going to use my business skills for something else, it very much felt aligned with the way I had set up my professional life. I wanted to have deep social impact while I was working. And so, for me personally, it was really a combination of what used to be two jobs. I could do one job. The more that we grew the for-profit business, the more social impact we could have. And that led me down this journey of what's social enterprise. I had no idea. And it really began as, as I started to get involved with the coffee business, the thing that drew me in was really a consumer question. Like, wow, this is truly a quote unquote good business. I wonder what other good businesses are there and how can I find them? And that question led to a lot of just wrestling for several years. And ultimately, it's like, as I was working to define it, I was like, I think I should probably write a book because I bet other people are asking the same question.
We'll talk about the coffee industry as a whole. And I guess, what did you learn early on that you didn't know? Talk about direct trade. For those who don't know, maybe give us a quick intro into sort of the coffee industry and the impact model specifically behind La Terza.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, the coffee, and this is still true today, it has a lot of modern day slave labor built into the system. Usually takes on the form of indentured servitude, and it's very easy to mask. But kind of a common story would be, a family is there to pick the harvest of the coffee beans, and then they get to live on the land for free, or food is provided, or some kind of arrangement, but with a quota of how much coffee is picked. And then, if they meet the quota, then whatever's extra they get to keep as payment. What normally happens is in this kind of model is the quotas are set really high and not achievable. So then that all of a sudden turns into a debt. And then when the story gets really tragic is when the children of the family start to, like, it's better for them to get out of school and help the family kind of meet this quota. And
Gotcha.
now we've created generational systems of poverty where that's that because education is a huge piece of lifting a generation out of poverty. Now we've removed that tool from that family's tool belt. So that's loosely how it looks like in a bad way. So that's why it's really important to have, like, what we call direct trade relationships, and working with importers as well that kind of have the same heartbeat that we do, to say, there's a real economic opportunity through education, through working closely with the farms to make sure everyone is paid a living wage wherever they're located. And so that direct trade is really a relationship that forms. And we
Okay.
start to get to know the producer. And even with that relationship, we can ensure that wages are what there should be. But it's also, like, especially in our model with our roaster, we're working with the producers, and we're trying out different processing methods at the farm level and experimenting. And if we get some off flavors, like, where did that come from? So there is this true relationship that forms, and the quality is a part of that relationship. So as the quality of the coffee gets better, so does the availability for that price, to make sure it's a price that I want to pay. Like, I don't want to pay just more for coffee. I want to pay more for a really good coffee. And so there's
Mm.
this dual relationship that exists with that direct trade opportunities.
And that relationship was already established when you purchased it from the original owner. All that was sort of set in place.
Yeah, the systems are set in place. We've established several new relationships since. We still have long-going relationships that existed when I purchased the business, but I would say right now our primary direct trade relationship, we've been working with her for about 7 or 8 years, is a woman-owned farm in Honduras. And, I talked about quality. We get samples all the time, and, our head roaster, he actually is from Uganda, and he won the African Barista Championship 3 years in a row. So he's very, very good on a global scale of what coffee is. So we get samples all the time, and he especially has a very high standard of what we're going to roast. And so one day I got the sample. I'm like, hey, and the next day I asked him how it was and what he did. He said, oh, actually, that coffee was really good. And that's not a statement I hear from him very often. So when he said that, I'm like, well, I should probably reach out to the producer. And that's what started that relationship. So Katia Duke is producer in Honduras. She's a fourth generation coffee owner, plantation owner, but the first woman in her family to manage the farm, and also the first person to take her coffee from commodity grade, which is, really just
Mm.
Starbucks level or
Gotcha.
what stays in the country, to specialty grade, which is what I'm looking for. And, just very skilled in what she's doing. And so quality is what drew us to that story. But as she added that element to her portfolio, saw revenue increases. And the first thing that she did was build a school. And so what we found is, there are certainly men out there that have this same kind of heartbeat, but especially in the second world, when you're empowering women, that story is a lot more common. They're really thinking about the community and
Mm.
how they can be investing. So, yeah, so she's become our primary direct trade relationship, and we're going really, really deep with her on how we can maximize that relationship.
And that kind of goes to the power of consumerism. And I know something that we sort of have a shared value over, of how much value our consumer dollar has, how much impact it has the possibility to make. And I'm a coffee drinker, and there's obviously millions of coffee drinkers. And there's a lot that goes into making coffee, getting it to wherever you purchase it from. But, that consumer choice of buying something matters, right? Like if people would have bought coffee from somewhere else and maybe not you guys or other people she supplied, that school wouldn't have got built.
Right.
So talk us through maybe your sort of maturation and learning over the years of impact consumer model where business can succeed, impact can be created from our consumer dollars, and just the power of purchasing for, let's just stick with us in the US, that will make it simple. But just talk about your learnings over the year and maybe when it clicked for you that, wow, this is our consumer spend is a very powerful way to kind of see the sort of impact we want to have in the world.
Well, this aha moment for me happened at that farm and at Katia's farm. So it was for me the first time going to Origin, seeing the farm, seeing all the processes. And at that moment in time, I'm like a few years in, I'm really like diving into like the conscious capitalism community. Social Enterprise Alliance was a national organization and became involved in our local chapter, became the chapter chairperson. I actually became the national chairperson for a few years. And everyone kind of had their own like definition of what it meant to be good or have impact. And, and look, I'm in Cincinnati, and Cincinnati is home to P&G and Kroger. And, and it's what I call a small, big city. So everybody knows somebody that works within those companies. And what I found interesting was a lot of the wrestling that I had for how to use business to make the world a better place. Those same questions were being asked by my friends who worked inside of P&G and Kroger. And so, we would like debate like, well, what does good even mean? Like clearly there are some things that corporate America and P&G and Kroger are doing that don't align. But there are also some things that do align. Like Kroger has a foundation called Zero Hunger, Zero Waste. And so they're in a perfect position to really handle two big social impact issues, food waste and hunger, and combine those two together. And I look at Kroger as, they're really in the best position to solve for something like that. So there are opportunities within these corporations to do something.
And they also employ a crap ton of people.
Yeah. And exactly.
Creates the local economy. So there's this flywheel.
So right. And so very quickly becoming this issue of like, well, what does good even mean? And realizing that it was so layered and so nuanced. And, and at this moment in time, we're talking like 2013 is when I formally purchased the business. But, Tom's Shoes was buy one, give one. And a lot of models were like, give back 10% of the proceeds. But then again, my journey of getting involved with coffee was quickly becoming the consumer. Like, oh, well, how do I find companies that are giving back? And I did find a number that would give back 10%, but I would ask the question like, well, okay, so, if I'm now buying La Terza, and should I work that into our business model also?
Yeah.
But is 10% like the final goal, or should I be like aiming for 15 or something higher? Like, I didn't know that answer. And then one of the things that was interesting about just like as we define good, I would find companies that would give back 10% to a specific, like usually an environmental cause, but then the products that they were making were also causing the environmental damage. I'm like, well, maybe instead of giving back 10%, can you just not cause the damage in the first place? And so is what they're doing good? It became very complicated.
It gets, and that's kind of my next question is, how do we simplify to where, because I've talked to so many people and, at some point it gets to be too much, and then you have, 35 labels on a bottle or a thing. And it's just like, at what point is it too much? At what point can we simplify it to where our company does this and we have this impact on the back end? It might not be that we give back. It's just that we do business,
Right.
I mean, she's a great example of like, we do business with people that we believe in and trust. And, when we employ people like that, they build these certain things within their community, right? Or, kids get to go to school. There's a domino effect just by the purchase rather than having to sort of give back a percentage of the proceeds and stuff like that, So
absolutely.
At what point, how do we simplify it? Maybe when you talk to people.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point about like the labels. Like, I'll be asked, hey, is she fair trade certified or is she organic certified? And I'm like, no. And I don't want her to be. Like, I've been to the farm and I know that she's paying a living wage, which is better than fair trade standards. And I know that she's using organic practices. So I don't want her to be certified because I already have that relationship. I already know these things exist. And that would be a waste of energy. That would be a waste of money. I'd rather build the next school or empower the next
Correct. Because
person, right?
that 10 grand she's going to have to spend on labels can go
Exactly.
to building a school or whatever
Exactly.
she thinks is better.
So yeah, for me, that there was this moment visiting in the farm, and it was 2017, and and these are the questions that are just rattling in my head, and I like, what does good even mean? And it finally hit me, to your point of even simplification. We're walking up to this table, and this woman is sorting coffee beans at this table, and there's three different categories. There's like specialty, so that's my coffee. There's the commodity grade, and then there's the leftovers are really shipped out to be instant coffee. So there's your three different tiers, and it's a difficult experience for me to describe, other than it felt very spiritual. Like this one woman at the table. Actually, this is a picture of her behind me on
Yeah, that's
my
awesome.
wall. This is that moment of she just radiated joy, and I'm like walking away from that moment, and she just was happy, and I knew that there was a living wage. I knew all of these other components of the story, and I walked away from that moment with two main ideas. One, for us at La Terza, this is why we strive for excellence in all the things that we do. This is why we strive to get our coffee out the door super fresh and roast to deliver and all that kind of thing. The process is why we find the perfect roast profile for that particular coffee for that year's crop. The more that we strive for excellence, the more that we're honoring her work, which is a job that I didn't even know existed until I saw it. And yet it's a critical job for us to do what we do. And then the second thing that I walked away from, to your point, is like, how do we simplify it? I just was like, I think it might be treat other people the way you want to be treated. That might be it.
Right.
Like, and so became more of a rhetorical question. Like, could I look at business and our impact through this lens of people? And ultimately, this is what led to writing this first book called Radical Business. The premise of it is, hey, to be human is to make things. And I think social impact means treat other people the way you want to be treated. And if that's true in business, there are these 7 key stakeholders. So, so much of the story that we're describing is my supply chain stakeholder. How am I looking at all the people in my supply chain, which is now extended to like my office supplies and the tea and like so many other aspects of what we bring in our supply chain. But for me, the framework, and really it was through the lens of owning La Terza that I got to see these different people groups kind of bubble up. How am I impacting my team? If I'm about living wages in a place like Honduras, then how am I building systems where we're about living wages in Cincinnati? And what does that creating healthy team culture look like? And what does treating your customer the way you want to be treated look like? What does treating the community that you want to be treated look like? Like, not everyone likes our coffee. Our coffee is kind of premium, so not everyone has the budget for our coffee, but there's a bunch of people in our community that are our neighbors. So, they are part of my community as well, even if they're not my customer. How do we treat our competitor the way we want to be treated, which is a difficult one, I
Yeah,
think,
sure.
but there can be some real opportunities. And one of the things I'm very excited about with the coffee industry is I think there's a real opportunity that we've created because of competition and because coffee it's currently the third traded commodity globally. And there's an opportunity for us as an industry to say, hey, world, this is a better way to do trade. Look at the model that we've set. And we can look at other global industries like textiles and say, hey, you're another industry that has a lot of slave trade in your processes. Let's just be real about it. Let's be honest. But here's some ways that we can do things differently. And I think we're able to have a collective voice as a coffee industry because of competition and healthy competition, that we're all kind of now doing this thing together. So it can be difficult, and other industries can be more challenging. Like the beauty of coffee, there's a ton of coffee drinkers. So, as there's lots of competitors, there's lots of people to be able to sell coffee to. But I think it is a healthy thing to think about our competitor and realize that they're human as well. And
Yep.
that is the common
Sure.
theme. The other two stakeholders, there's 7 in the book. How do we look at the environment and kind of personify that, treat the environment the way we would want to be treated. And then, profit is good and healthy, and profit is a version of self-care. So at the end of the day, making sure, especially social enterprise folks, that that we have a profitable engine is a key component of being a social enterprise. So those are the 7 stakeholders, and I think for me, as I really started to live them out in the coffee journey, the kind of the final piece of the puzzle was trying to measure them just like I would my bottom line. What are my quarterly goals? What are my yearly goals? Here's what we're currently doing. And then not getting so bogged down with you know, lofty goals of I still don't have this one, but someday I want to have backyard compostable packaging for our coffee.
Okay.
But so that's not available.
Tough. It's tough.
But recycling packaging is the next step I can take. So let me do that. And so
Yep.
how do I break all these long-term vision goals down into the yearly goals or quarterly goals that, like I said, just it's very much like your bottom line. We have these goals, and so here's how we measure those. So here's my impact with my supply chain. Here's my impact with my team members, and start to break those down in the same way. It just comes down to we see each other as human beings. Like the competitor, is a great example. Like my local competitors, they care about everything that's the exact same way that I do. If we weren't competing for the same account, we'd be best friends in real life. Yeah, and we're friends, right? So, but they're so much like me, So to see them as human is a really important aspect.
I've kind of likened it to sports and business. Kind of have this parallel of one, they can bring people together in a competitive environment. But also at the end of the day, they could shake hands or hug after a game and have a beer or something together, where there's this healthy competition. But at the end of the day, we still have that human identity, and we still have the same problems, and we can relate in a lot of ways. Obviously, you don't want to maybe talk about trade secrets and stuff like that, but obviously there's a humanization there and a conversation that could be had that's real and relatable. And like you said, if sort of the competition business side wouldn't evolve, you'd probably be amazing friends.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So why write the next book? Why we buy and why it matters? What does it sort of focus on? Why do it now?
Well, I talked about how the first book, the core ideas really is to be human is to make things. And then to treat other people the way you want to be treated. The whole book is really that premise. And then how it shows up in real life and in real business. But that is the controlling idea. So as I still had this looming question that got me involved in this journey of social enterprises. How do I find the businesses that are doing good? And I still have that challenge as a consumer myself. Who's doing good? How do we measure that? How do we define it? How do I work that in my budget? Lots of conversations. And so I still just had this inner urge to wrestle with what consumerism meant to me and how do I find these good businesses. And what I realized was that consumerism is essentially the same, it's built on the same foundational idea that if to be human is to make things, then to be human is also to buy, sell, and trade. We can't live this life without the help of other people. We consume the minute we're born. I mean, we consume the minute we're conceived. One life is giving to another. We all go to schools. We all drove on public roads. We cannot live this life without other people. So consumerism, we definitely have an overconsumption problem, and not just in the things we buy, but news and social media. So we have to wrestle with that. But before we do that, I just was feeling this conviction that we needed to take a hard look at what consumerism meant. And rather than having it have a negative connotation, I really think consumerism is fundamentally spiritual, that it's not bad. It's truly a celebration of our humanity's interconnectedness. And so if we look at it through this lens of a celebration, as it look at it through this lens that it's fundamentally human to consume, it shifts our perspective kind of, again, back to that human. It shifts the perspective of we're buying from each other, we're supporting each other, we all want the same thing. We all want just a better life for the next generation, for our kids, and education and access to healthcare, all that kind of stuff. And the vehicle that can really accelerate all of that is through healthy consumption.
Yeah, we agree on a lot there. It's such a unique and powerful thing, and obviously overconsumption is also a big issue, right? in everything, there's always this sort of fine line between something being amazing and something being, or something being positive, something being negative. And so I think our economy is 70% based off consumerism. And so it's what makes the US the giant it is. There's just like, when does it sort of cross the line in some aspects? And that's kind of what's fantastic is about us, is we could the pendulum swings one way and we kind of pull it back in another way that's a little bit more righteous. And then, if it goes too far that way, we kind of bring it back to the middle. And whether it's politics or business, that's kind of the great thing and the unique thing about, the US and how we've been able to basically build off consumerism and innovate off consumerism and get feedback from consumerism. It's a great data point, right? It's going to tell you very quickly if you're going to survive or not, based on if the consumer actually wants what you're creating and what you're selling. So it's been a powerful journey I've been on to, just with Cause and watching all the different impact models, like you said, sort of going from 1-to-1 to then giving a percentage back. And now I think it's really rooted in what, like, you're doing at La Terza. It's like, how can we just build a simplified business model that across the entire business ecosystem, it treats everyone with respect and well-being and the sort of the golden rule aspect, and trying to find ways to improve every year. Again, just going back to athlete, right? They're in the off season, they're going to try to work and figure out something to add to their game or their ability. No different in the business. You're trying to improve one little bit at a time to eventually get to, biodegradable packaging. But you kind of have to start with, okay, can we get the recycled packaging down first? So there's just a beautiful thing about staying in business and being able to improve, right? So you and the team have been successful so far because you're here. Like, decade later is amazing accomplishment in itself, and improving along the way is amazing. I'll kind of end on a couple questions. The first would be, over that decade of building impact business and seeing the impact of it both domestically but also internationally and with your partners, what are some of the tips and advice you'd sort of give to people maybe wanting to change careers, maybe want to start something small and that has an impact model behind it? I guess, what would be some of that foundational advice for people starting?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wasn't, when I wrote the first book, I wasn't expecting to get this question asked often from people that were essentially like looking at the second half of their career. Is like, they essentially made, like, they made their money in whatever corporate job or, whatever it is. But they wanted to think about what that impact could be and how do they, use the last half of their career or wherever it was. I mean, there certainly were younger people in their career as well that would ask the question of, how do I have purpose and meaning to my work? You hit on a point in just a common theme of being a social enterprise business is you take the first step and it's a journey. I think that's true for the consumer as well. Hey, even with the book, one of the first things I'm really asking you to do, 3 things as the reader of this new book, Why We Buy, is first, change your perspective. What does consumerism mean? So that's an example. Then what is the one thing you can do? Like, let's not worry about, wrecking your budget, or do what is like one brand that you can become a super fan of? And then, how do you find 3 other people to do it with you, and have these kind of conversations? And I think if we did that begins the journey. And so I would apply the same kind of ideas to wherever you're at. What is the social good that you can have right now just by changing your perspective? And, I refer to Mr. Rogers a lot as someone that as I studied kind of his work and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, learning how angry he was often was a surprise to me. He would see something like racism and he would then get so mad that he would turn it into a positive story, and he would, unpack that story with kids, and he wouldn't shy away from these big social issues. He would get, but anger was a fuel that he used when he saw something wrong in the world to, like, figure out how to make it better. So again, like, I think emotions are, we sometimes refer to like these big emotions a lot, like anger, as something that's negative. I wonder if it's better to say anger is like, it's telling me something. It's telling me something's not right with the world. So when we think about like what your passion is, yeah, we should explore like maybe what we love to do, but I think we should equally explore like what are the things that are really pissing us off.
Yeah.
So,
Listen to the
because
anger, huh? A little
yeah,
bit.
it's
It's telling
probably
you
trying
something.
to tell us something, and then we can start to explore the series of questions in that path.
That's interesting. The last question I'll have is a little bit on the future, and you're kind of doing a lot of things, and obviously you're gonna go down this journey with the book. But from the maybe La Terza side of things, or maybe other projects that you have, what are the next 3 to 5 years look like? What are some of the goals and successes you would like to achieve?
Yeah. Well, I actually do want to write a third book. I won't.
Gotta be a trilogy now. You can't just do
Yeah,
two.
right. Yeah, if the first book is to recognize our humanity and the things that we make, the second would be recognizing our humanity and our interconnectedness and our consumerism. The third is really La Terza's name. So La Terza is Italian. That's our way to say, hey, Italy, love espresso, thank you. But the direct translation is the third, and it's this idea of the third place. So a coffee shop is a community gathering space. It's not your home, not your work, but here's
Amazing.
where people can come together. So I think the third book is around that idea, like what does a third place really mean? What does community really mean? And again, to humanize it all, to be human is to be in relationship. So how do we create these safety zones to really kind of get back to relational health? And so we've got to figure out how to see each other again, to humanize each other again. And so La Terza, our goals are how do we empower the third place? And we do like coffee shop coaching, but I think that that's going to start to expand as almost a thought leader with third place businesses like, a yoga studio or a community pool or something to that effect. That those are all park systems. Those are all examples of third places as well. And so how can we, you know, for La Terza, double down into the meaning of our name and keep empowering the third place? Because at least in the US, I think we need more safe places where we can see each other as humans again. And the more coffee shops, the more third places we have, I think the more that'll get us back on track to unifying the country. So that's probably third book content, and it's definitely where La Terza is going. And so if you're asking me for 5 years, that's probably what I'll be talking about then.
I love it, David. Thanks so much for taking the time. Congrats
Yeah.
on the first book, now the second book. I'll put everything in the show notes.